On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines flight counter in Portland, Oregon. He was described as being in his mid-40s, dressed in a dark business suit, with a black tie and a crisp white shirt. He purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle, a short 30-minute flight. Boarding Flight 305, a Boeing 1727, he took his seat, 18C, lit a cigarette, and ordered a bourbon and soda. Nothing about him seemed out of the ordinary. It was just another businessman on a routine flight. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. Thinking it was just a lonely businessman's phone number, she initially slipped it into her purse without looking. He leaned closer and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note was printed in neat, all capital letters. It stated that he had a bomb in his briefcase and wanted her to sit with him. Schaffner did as she was told, taking the seat next to him. Cooper calmly opened his briefcase, giving her a glimpse of 8 red cylinders attached to wires and a large battery. He then stated his demands clearly and precisely. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency, 4 parachutes to primary and to reserve, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle to refuel the plane upon arrival. The flight attendant relayed the message to the cockpit. The captain, William Scott, immediately contacted Seattle-Tacoma Air Traffic Control, who in turn alerted local and federal authorities. The airline's president, Donald Nyrop, authorized the payment of the ransom, deciding that the lives of the 36 passengers and 6 crew members were worth more than the money. On the ground, a frantic scramble began.
Ow!
FBI agents worked to gather the $200,000, which consisted of 10,000 unmarked $20 bills. Meanwhile, officials at a local skydiving school were contacted to provide the requested parachutes. For the next 2 hours, the plane circled Puget Sound. To avoid alarming the other passengers, the crew told them they were experiencing a minor mechanical issue that required them to burn off fuel before landing. The passengers remained blissfully unaware that they were part of one of the most audacious heists in history. Cooper, for his part, remained perfectly calm, even ordering a second bourbon and offering to pay for it. He was described as polite and well-spoken throughout the entire ordeal. At 5:39 p.m., the plane finally landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. The hijacker ordered the pilot to taxi to a remote, brightly lit section of the tarmac, far from the main terminal. Once parked, he demanded that the cabin lights be dimmed to deter any potential police snipers. An airline employee approached the aircraft on foot and delivered a knapsack filled with the money and the 4 parachutes. After confirming the contents, Cooper allowed all passengers and 2 of the flight attendants, including Florence Schaffner, to leave the plane. He kept the captain, first officer, a flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant on board. While the plane was being refueled, Cooper outlined his new flight plan to the cockpit crew. He wanted them to fly to Mexico City, maintaining a specific set of parameters, an altitude no higher than 10,000 feet, a speed of no more than 150 knots, with the landing gear down and the wing flaps at 15 degrees. The pilots were concerned. Flying a Boeing 727 that slowly and at such a low altitude was risky, and the range was insufficient to reach Mexico City. Cooper, showing a surprising knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities, was flexible. They settled on a new destination, Reno, Nevada, which would require another refueling stop. He also specified that they were to fly with the rear air stair, the staircase, at the back of the 727 in the lowered position. At approximately 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 was back in the air. Heading south towards Reno, the remaining crew were gathered in the cockpit, separated from Cooper by a curtain. This was his final instruction. Sometime after 8 p.m., somewhere between Seattle and Reno, a warning light flashed in the cockpit, indicating that the aft air stair had been opened. The crew felt a change in air pressure. D.B. Cooper had made his move. He had strapped on a parachute, tied the money bag to himself, and leaped from the back of the commercial airliner into the freezing, rainy night. He plunged into a vast, rugged wilderness, disappearing without a trace. When the plane landed safely in Reno 2 hours later, authorities swarmed the aircraft. All they found was Cooper's black clip-on tie, 2 of the 4 parachutes he had requested, and the cigarette butts he had smoked. The man known as Don Cooper, a name later misreported by the press as D.B. Cooper, had vanished. This kicked off one of the largest and most extensive manhunts in American history. The FBI, along with local law enforcement and military personnel, immediately began searching the vast forested area where they believed Cooper might have landed. The search zone was roughly defined, lying somewhere along the flight path over southwestern Washington. The terrain was mountainous and densely wooded, making any search incredibly difficult, especially given the harsh winter conditions. Despite deploying hundreds of ground troops and conducting extensive aerial searches, not a single clue was found. No parachute, no briefcase, no sign of the man himself. It was as if he had been swallowed by the night sky. The FBI began a meticulous investigation, codenamed Noriak, for Northwest hijacking. They interviewed hundreds of people and pursued thousands of leads, but the identity of Dan Cooper remained a mystery. The case became a national obsession. Who was this man? Was he an experienced skydiver or a military paratrooper? His calm demeanor and precise demands suggested careful planning and possibly some expertise. Yet skydiving experts pointed out that a jump at night in a storm over rugged terrain and from a plane flying at that speed was extremely dangerous, even for a seasoned professional. The choice of parachutes was also puzzling. He had been given 2 primary parachutes and 2 reserve chutes. One of the primaries was a training chute that had been sewn shut, rendering it useless.
Ow!
Of the 2 he took, one was the dummy chute, and the other was an older, less reliable reserve model. An expert would have likely noticed this. For nearly a decade, the case went cold. There were no credible sightings, and none of the ransom money ever surfaced in circulation. The FBI had recorded the serial numbers of all 10,000 bills, but they never turned up. Then, in February 1980, a surprising discovery was made. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram, while on a family vacation, was digging in the sandy banks of the Columbia River at a place called Tennebar. He unearthed 3 packets of decaying cash. The bills were waterlogged and bundled with rubber bands. When authorities were called, they confirmed the unthinkable. The serial numbers matched the money given to D.B. Cooper 9 years earlier. The discovery of nearly $5,800 of the ransom money reignited the investigation. It raised more questions than it answered. Tennebar was miles away from the projected drop zone. How did the money get there? Did Cooper lose some of it during his jump? Or did he land in or near the river and perish, with the money washing downstream over the years? Geologists studied the river's flow and sediment layers, trying to trace the money's journey. Their findings suggested the money had likely washed ashore several years after the hijacking. Despite an intensive search of the area around Tennebar, no other traces of Cooper or the remaining ransom money were ever found. The discovery was a tantalizing clue, but it led to another dead end. Over the decades, the FBI investigated more than 1,000 suspects. The list included ex-military personnel, experienced parachutists, and individuals with a history of similar crimes. One of the most prominent suspects was a man named Richard McCoy Jr., a Vietnam veteran and expert skydiver who staged a similar copycat hijacking just a few months after Cooper's. McCoy successfully parachuted from a plane with $500,000, but was caught days later. While the similarities were striking, McCoy's physical description didn't quite match, and he was in Las Vegas with his family the day of the Cooper hijacking. Another suspect was Dwayne Weber, a World War II veteran who, on his deathbed in 1995, confessed to his wife, "I'm Don Cooper." His wife later recalled odd details from their life together, including a nightmare he had about leaving his fingerprints on the back of a plane. However, the FBI eventually ruled him out based on a DNA comparison with a partial sample recovered from Cooper's tie. The investigation officially remained open for 45 years. The FBI collected a vast amount of physical evidence, including the tie, the cigarette butts, and the parachutes left behind. Advances in forensic technology allowed them to analyze these items in ways that were impossible in the 1970s. In 2011, the FBI announced that analysis of Cooper's tie had revealed traces of rare earth elements, specifically pure unalloyed titanium. This suggested that Cooper may have worked as a manager or engineer in a chemical plant or a metal fabrication facility, possibly in the aerospace industry, which used these materials extensively in the early 1970s. This new lead offered a specific profile of the hijacker, but it still didn't point to a particular person. The mystery of his identity endured. Finally, in 2016, the FBI announced that it was officially closing the active investigation. They concluded that the resources dedicated to the 45-year-old case could be better used to address more pressing priorities. The case was moved to inactive status. To this day, the fate of D.B. Cooper remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Did he survive the perilous jump and live out his days in quiet anonymity with his fortune? Or did he meet his end in the unforgiving wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, his remains lost to the elements? The story of D.B. Cooper has become a modern legend, a symbol of rebellion and audacity. He represents the ultimate ghost, a man who planned and executed a seemingly perfect crime and then simply vanished from the face of the earth. The legend continues to capture the public imagination, spawning countless books, documentaries, and theories. And until definitive evidence emerges, the man in the business suit who jumped into the night will remain an enigma, the only person to ever get away with hijacking a commercial airliner in American history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's most fascinating unsolved cases, be sure to subscribe to Facts Repo for more.